So our next panel topic is allies and partners integration. As we have learned in supporting Ukraine, the Army should collaborate with our allies and partners to gain access to their industrial base to meet readiness requirements as far forward as possible. This panel will discuss opportunities where the Army should focus its efforts with our allies and partners to expand capabilities to meet future large-scale combat operations requirements. To moderate this discussion, we have Dr. Nelson K. Williams, Regional Sustainment Framework Director, Indo-Pacific, Office of the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Product Support. With over 35 years of experience as a logistician, Dr. Williams serves as that director for product support. Previous assignments include, among others, Headquarters Department of the Army G4, proponent for Army Material Maintenance Policy, Field and Sustainment, Depot, Organic Industrial Base Maintenance. Dr. Williams has a doctorate in divinity, a bachelor's of science in business management, and is a graduate of the Army Management Staff College. Dr. Williams, the floor is yours, sir.
First of all, thank you, Lieutenant General Smith, and certainly General Brown and AUSA staff. And I really think something is in order. And I really think that there is an applause in order for someone who can put this type of experience in one room. And so historical and current. So if you will, help me with a round of applause for the AUSA team. And I began to look around the room and I started dating myself with so many great faces that I've seen here. So I'm honored, certainly, to be amongst this highly distinguished panel. And I think it was said earlier, it is definitely true that we have some great folks on these panels today. And certainly I'm honored to be here with this panel of members today. And first, I'd like to introduce Lieutenant General Heidi Hoyle. She currently serves as the U.S. Army Deputy Chief of Staff G4. She's a native of Bay City, Michigan, and a 1994 graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. General Hoyle has served in various command and staff positions across the Army, and most notably served as the Commanding General of the Joint Munitions Command, Chief of Ordnance, and Commanding General of the Military Surface Deployment and Distribution Command. And next we have Lieutenant General Retired Jim Pasquarette, and he serves as the General Dynamics Land Systems Vice President for Strategy and the United States Business Development. And he retired from the United States Army in 2021 as a Lieutenant General. His 38-year career included leadership assignments at every level of the Army and culminated as the Principal Army Staff Deputy responsible for developing the Army's 5-year budget plan, an $8 billion effort. And next to him, we have Mr. Patrick Mason, and he serves as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Defense Exports and Cooperation. He is the Army Principal responsible for security assistance and armaments cooperation, expert policies, direct commercial sales of Army defense articles, and international cooperative research, development, and acquisition. These programs employ over 4,700 Army soldiers and civilians and exceed $42 billion annually in sales and cooperative efforts with over 150 foreign countries. And so finally, beside him, we have next is Brigadier General Dave Kelly. And he currently serves as the Australian military attaché. He grew up in Wilmstown, Victoria. He joined the Australian Army in 1991, commencing officer training at the Australian Defence Force Academy. He graduated from the Royal Military College, Duntroon in 1994 and served with the Royal Australian Regiment. General Kelly has held various staff appointments, most recently as the Chief of Staff for Headquarters Australian Army. He served at the Pentagon as a Division Chief in the Trans-Regional Threats Coordination Cell, United States Joint Chiefs of Staff. General Kelly has served on operations in Bougainville, East Timor, and Afghanistan as the Chief Combined Joint Operations. And so as you can see, we have a great panel here. Just want to start and introduce this topic today, allies, partners, and integration. And we find ourselves nearly 3 years in the Russian-Ukraine war, and we talked about that a little bit earlier. No one envisioned we would be here today, but here we are, and we see the ramping up of the industrial base in support of our NATO allies and directly in support of Ukraine through the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative and the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which we know as PDA. And as we see the strengthening of NATO, we also see opportunities for our allies and partners to look at their own industrial bases. And recently, OSD established the Regional Sustainment Framework, not as a direct result of Ukraine, but it denotes the importance of partners and allies as it relates to the industrial base and achieving warfighter readiness. And likewise, you heard it mentioned earlier, FY24 National Defense Authorization Act 842 says identify ways to capitalize on the inherent interoperability, commonality, and interchangeability of platforms, including to enable effective maintenance and repair activities in a contested logistics environment. So having said that, we'll jump right in, and the panelists, as they, with their opening comments, not only will they open up with the question that I'm going to give them, but they'll also make some introductory remarks as it pertains to the topic. So the first question I have in the queue is for Lieutenant General Hoyle. After observing the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, what key areas of improvement do you see for the industrial base capabilities of the U.S. military and its allies? And what steps can be taken to address these gaps and enhance our collective ability to support future operations?
Well, thank you, Dr. Williams. And I want to echo your comments towards AUSA and General Brown, and thank you for bringing us all together to, first of all, connect, but then have great discussion and dialogue across all of our core competencies. As I sit in my position and really have watched what has happened in Ukraine, it gets really big and broad as we have our daily interactions with the chief, as we have our interactions with the ASCC and theater Army commanders on a weekly touch point. And listening to the commanders that are far forward on the battlefield and understanding their needs and capabilities. It's like this perfect environment to learn right now. And that is exactly what your Army is doing. We are observing, we are taking lessons learned, and we are with urgency, and I say that strongly, with urgency, adapting and changing our Army to what it needs to be for the future threats. As I think about where I sit, I go on an annual Service 4 trip. So the Joint Staff J4 brings us all together. The Service 4s have, over the past 2 years, gone into the Pacific for obvious reasons. And, the very core piece of that, in my observations, is obviously the tyranny of distance. The tyranny of distance that exists there and the capabilities that we have mean that we have to optimize those capabilities. Think about the aircraft turning multiple turns to support the Ukraine, right? Those distances are greater to the Pacific. Very obvious, right? I'm not teaching you anything new by telling you that information. But what I do want to tell you is as we look across, right, we talk about our defense industrial base, our organic industrial base. And if you listen closely to General Mohan's comments this morning, he talked about the expeditionary industrial base, right? Taking the life cycle management commands to the commanders to execute their operations. What I really want to think about with this panel is the global aspect of it, the allies and partners that we bring together. And so as again, I talk about that obvious piece and the tyranny of distance, there is also the illuminating effects of contestation. Okay. And so think about not only the contestation that General Legere was talking about earlier with the supply chain and the things that happen on a daily basis, weather, tariffs, political situations, you name the threat that has happened in the United States or even around the world that has changed the way we conduct operations. And so as we look across multi-domain operations, there are things that our Army must do to be ready for the future. And so as Dr. Williams mentioned with the NDAA, one of the things that we were tasked to do in the Army was to prepare and conduct forward repair activities. And so our Secretary of Defense and OSD has directed each of the services to go ahead and conduct what is called a Regional Sustainment Framework Pathway Project. The obvious one for the Air Force is the F-35. What the Army is working on is Army watercraft. Okay, and so as we work through Army watercraft in a regional sustainment framework, this is a forward repair activity for MROs. And as we work through this, I want to give you an example of what has just happened in the past week. Okay. In the past week, the United States Army has taken one of our vessels out of OCCM maintenance, on-cycle conditional maintenance. Okay. That vessel that came out of OCCM was repaired forward in Korea. On time, on budget. Now, I give you this as an example, not to shame the U.S. shipbuilding. I give you this example because the number of watercraft that the United States Army has right now, we cannot afford to bring that vessel back to the United States during contested operations, repair the vessel, and then return the vessel. So let me give you some distances, right? With the West Coast, just to reach the West Coast, that vessel would have had to travel 9,000 nautical miles, 38 sailing days, just to get back home. 10% of a year just to get home, then to conduct the maintenance, and then to return another 38 days. Okay. As we did this operation in Korea, it was 5 days. We have now proven that we can work with our partners and allies for ships to conduct maintenance forward in the battle space. Now, Korea is nowhere near as far as Australia. And so you can only take these numbers and multiply them to a greater capacity. Okay. And so I give you that as an example of what we were tasked to do in the NDAA to make this come to fruition. One second thing that I'll probably give you as an example of some of the things that we are doing right now in the Army is working in the predictive logistics space. We currently have $87 million programmed for predictive logistics across the next FIDUP, so 2630. This will provide the sustainment support and services ahead of need for the warfighter. And I give it to you as an example because of the in-transit visibility, the asset visibility, the ability to utilize autonomous vessels, and also to get back to the basics of the DLA's Class 9 management. And so we do not have the ability to pre-position stocks in the quantities that we need to do, the Iron Mountains that we did for the CENTCOM operations that we conducted over the past 20 years. And so we have to be precise. You remember General Mohan's picture up there as he's delivering with a UAV a specific part, right, that was just printed. the 250,000 parts that General Mohan mentioned earlier that we do not have, the specific NSNs that we do not have available right now, we can't pre-position them if we don't have them. And so the predictive logistics that we're doing right now, instead of looking historically just at what is being done based off of historical demand, it is actually trying to predict what is going to break on a vehicle, on a piece of equipment in the future. Okay, and so the censoring of some vessels and vehicles is one thing, but we can't censor everything up. We just cannot afford to do so. And so we have to find other ways to measure on each of our platforms how parts are going to fail. And so that is a huge piece that our contested logistics cross-functional team is working on right now. And again, $87 million invested in the next POM to be able to do so. A formalized requirement written in the Army, and we are moving forward together. And so I give those two examples, right? These are things that we in the Army are doing, but that our allies and partners will obviously take advantage of with us as we support each other around the globe. Thanks for that question.
Thank you, ma'am. Lieutenant General Pasquarette, the next question is for you. There's been a lot of talk and discussion at all levels about co-sustainment and allies and partners integration. So as a former commander and now as defense industry executive, what are your perspective and thoughts on this initiative?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Williams. Yeah, it's great to be here. It's good to see so many familiar faces and friends from a previous life that I'm still fond of and connected to. Quickly, I'll say one quick, fast story is I had a new grandchild born 2 nights ago. Okay, yeah. But I bring that up. About 10 years ago, I was at LAMPAC. I was a 2-star. I was General Vince Brooks' deputy, and it was a make or break year. And so there's a lot of pressure to do well. And Lieutenant General Brown got up on the stage at a panel at LAMPAC and said, "Wow, great timing. I got to be out here for this panel, but my daughter had a grandchild yesterday. She must have been in the 25th or something, sir." And got to be there for it because of this panel. And says, "Grandkids are so great. If I knew how great grandkids were, I would have had them before I had kids." It just really stuck with me. And one of my best bosses I've ever had was General Brown. Okay, listen, back to the business at hand here. It's great to be with Heidi. And I really never knew her until I got in this job. And thanks for what you're doing, making a difference. Okay, so co-sustainment. Mostly from, I think, where I'm at today and what we're doing, at least in General Dynamics Land Systems. I'm sure some of my industry partners are in the middle of this too. It's vitally important for us. And there's a little bit too, when we talk co-sustainment, we're also working in parallel to that co-production. They're not one and the same, but also a barrier to entry if you want to win an FMS case. But I'll talk co-sustainment since that's the topic here. What we are doing as an exemplar is establishing a regional sustainment center in Poland. Poland is getting the SEP V3 tank, best tank in the world. Romania is under contract for that. You can drive next door, kind of, to get sustainment from that. There are M1A1s in Ukraine today. And of course, the United States Army rotates ABCTs in that part of the world. And so to be able to sustain that capability forward, addressing the contested logistics challenge that the Army has to fix forward, as Heidi was talking about it a little bit ago, to not rely on extended locks to keep the operational readiness rate of a complex system. And yes, the reason, a lot of questions a couple years ago, should Ukraine get the Abrams tank? It's way too complicated. Yeah, our equipment in the U.S. is very complicated, perhaps, to sustain. That's why it's the best in the world. So you have to have a way to sustain the capability forward. But this RSC that we're establishing, partnered with the government of Poland, they are providing the facility for us, and it's first class. I've not been there myself, but I've seen the photos of it and talked to folks there. It is providing, today, it's just providing spare parts forward to sustain the M1A1s. But as they get the SEP V3s and later this year, we are establishing a maintenance capability up through depot level, training for both mechanics and tank crews. And then also we'll have the SEP V3 parts will be pushed forward to sustain those Polish tanks. We were working with the 21st TSC, and I see Michael Layler, who was on the same plane with me from Michigan yesterday, working forward with AMC on this also to have the contract mechanism that those ABCTs can leverage the capability for the spares and any echelon above maintenance capability they need forward in that part of the world. So why is all that important? First, for us, it's a little bit reputational. You get this tank that's the best in the world, it has to be sustained. And left to their own devices, the Poles, who are so committed to that part of the world and really the center of gravity, a lot of things happening, they will try to go it their own way. They'll try to do it themselves if we don't establish this ability to sustain it forward. And you know what they'll do then? When they're in a ditch, they'll go to the United States Army and say, my tanks are broken, I need some parts from you. And so that's one reason we're doing it. And the other part was the complicated nature of the equipment that I just talked about. So, and then in co-production, I'll just quickly go to that, and then I'll push on for time's sake, Doctor. That, as I mentioned, is barrier to entry into Poland. India with strikers right now with us. Anywhere in the Middle East and North Africa, if you want to get a FMS case, and I see, Pat Mason right next to me, who we work with closely on this, you have to agree on the front end that you're going to do co-production in those countries. That has a positive, for us, a supply chain help for the system here, because in order to do co-production in a country, our supply chain folks go in there and establish with local vendors the ability to produce parts that can be integrated onto on a production line in their country to produce an end product. And that provides us depth and resilience, and also pricing with our domestic suppliers to make sure we keep the costs down. So it thickens and provides, again, resilience to supply chain over time. And so let me cut it there, and I'll push back to Dr. Williams to keep the conversation going.
All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Mason, the next question is for you, sir. From where you sit, what challenges do you foresee with establishing capability forward with allies and partners under a co-sustainment framework? The second part of that question is, if we get past those hurdles, what are some of the key benefits you see to the Army industrial base?
Thanks, Dr. Williams, for the question, and certainly I appreciate the opportunity to be here with these panel members. Liz, thanks to AMC for including me in this panel. A little bit of an ASALT voice to it, because I do sit within ASALT. That's where DASADEC sits, and I work for Doug Bush. So as you look at co-sustainment and you look at what are the opportunities with it, I did want to take a step back to provide some context, because honestly, a bulk of our workload these days is in the international agreement space, because every country, as they are looking at expanding their military capability and modernizing it, expects to have some type of agreement for co-production or co-sustainment. And so it has really challenged us, because these are new areas. I'll say new, they're areas that we haven't worked in over decades within the department. And so there has been some learning in how to effectively craft this. So just for perspective, the average FMS building partner capacity dollar value that we did per year was approximately $14 billion. And then over the last 2 years, we've gone from 14 billion to where last year the requirements totaled 42.9 billion. If we had closed one additional case for Poland 4 days earlier, we would have been over 50 billion in requirements or sales. And with that, there is an expectation from the countries, not just for the delivery of that capability, but then, as Jim Pasquarette talked about, is what is the component that leads to sovereign production capability for them, or integration into the supply chain associated with it. And then how do you craft those agreements, and what do you do to effectively bring those solutions to bear? And then I will say, just looking at that, I would say globally, we see so many countries that are now above 2% on GDP. Several countries, especially as you look at the Baltics and you look at Poland, They're well above 2%, going to 3% GDP. They have shredded or gotten rid of all of their Soviet era equipment. And so this is created globally, whether it's within EUCOM, CENTCOM, or Indo-PACOM, the drivers for that 50 billion that I talked about earlier. So how we approach this is very much with business and as they look at these opportunities, because they certainly have a desire to ensure that their product succeeds when it gets into country, and the sustainment aspects of it, whether it is M1 tanks or Apaches, or say our Patriot system, or as we modernize to LTAMs and IBCS. The challenge, quite honestly, and I'll broadly say, is just how to broker that agreement, how to close the business case for it, and make sure that it meets what the country needs. But then I always, and in my role working with an ASALT and then with General Hoyle and the G-Force, has that tie back into larger Army objectives, such that as we do this, it increases the readiness of our forward repair and return. It increases readiness of our forces and the forward repair and return activities. And so the first place that we do, which is really, I will say, is largely the easy button, and you see this with GDLS, is the commercial aspects where the business will go in and broker those agreements. While I know we provided, or General Pasquarette provided an example in Poland on the regional sustainment center that would be there, I would also say there's the leveraging of the commercial opportunities that exist. When you look at many companies that have large commercial content as well, they already have established business relationships in those countries. Engine repair and return is a great example of that. They do engine repair and return for commercial aircraft. As you integrate in, whether it is an M1 engine, the Honeywell M1 engine, or if it is a engine that's in one of our aircraft, they already have commercial capability to go do that. So how do we leverage that so that they have the capability to do it? The challenge with that is it is done in a commercial framework, and it doesn't meet the military specifications that we have, such that we can use it for repair and return activity. And so I would say that is an example of a challenge that we have, yet if we can overcome that challenge, there is repair and return capability. We use aviation as the example, and that's really my background, that exists in Indo-PACOM, in Europe, and across CENTCOM, that you can leverage if we work through the commerciality aspects of that, and then be able to converge on a solution that would allow that. The second thing that we encourage, and as I've gone around and traveled extensively internationally, is for those small and medium businesses that have significant capability, is to educate and talk about how they can enter into the supply chain through competition that exists. The challenge is that's a best athlete competition, typically with a prime or a vendor as it goes through. So we do look at that, but then we encourage them to go integrate into the supply chain, and certainly look to give them opportunities and broker some of the dialogue with business. The last is when we get into the specific agreements and MOUs that exist out there, where the country wants a very, very deliberate co-production or co-sustainment agreement with the USG, with the US Army. And then we have an agreement on what's going to happen and how we're going to go do that. And this will actually be a good segue to my colleague from Australia. I'll use 155 as an example as well. And so the work that we've done with Australia through formalized agreements is to transfer the technical data to Australia for the manufacturing of 795. Australia is standing up that capability, ensuring that that 795 round that comes off of Australian production, where they do load assembly and pack, is certified to 795 standards. It is the same as a US round. And so now, whether while you're shipping material to Australia, shipping material versus shipping an all-up round is a lot easier. You've got tremendous TNT capability in Australia as you do that. And then how do we work that, transfer the TDP such that they can produce that, store it, and it cuts down on the logistics burden that we have. I will say, I've talked a little bit about that's a challenge, but it's an opportunity. I will say the last real challenge that we have is just the deployment of capital. We are capital limited as far as where we go in investment in the Army. A business has to look at it and look at where they draw the capital from to make these investments. And so we spend a good bit of time actually trying to figure out, again, how we broker the business and where the capital can be deployed from. And deploying international capital, as I think many of you know, is incredibly complex when you look at the financial rules in each and every country. I think I've learned in this job that one of the US superpowers is our ability to rapidly deploy capital. But that is not universally true as you look across the globe. And so that is an area that requires significant time and discussion. And certainly we have discussed that with NATO as well as NATO is looking at their framework. So with that, I will transition back. Thank you, Dr. Williams.
Thank you, sir. The next question is for Brigadier General Kelly, sir. In 2023, Honorable Loman, the former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Sustainment, when announcing the Regional Sustainment Framework, stated, co-sustainment with our allies and partners is imperative to achieve an agile, resilient, and globally integrated ecosystem in a contested logistics environment. Reflecting on those comments, as one of our closest allies, what are your thoughts on those comments and what efforts do you see moving forward to support this initiative?
Thank you very much, Dr. Williams, and to AUSA, thank you for the opportunity to come out on this panel today. And I guess as a foreigner, if I may just indulge for a minute and pass on my thoughts and condolences for what's happening out in Los Angeles at the moment as well. That's pretty hard to watch. And as a country that tends to burn regularly, we're sort of used to that, but not in that sort of cityscape environment. So thoughts are with all of those out there. I guess just before getting onto the question, I think it's important to perhaps offer a little bit of context into where we are at as an army at the moment. Like the rest of the globe, we've felt a quickening sort of coming our way, and that quickening has probably threatened a couple of things that have always been wonderful parts of Australia, and that is we've always had a little bit of space and we've had a bit of a moat to sort of protect us, and we've probably had a little bit of time, or thought we'd had a little bit of time to enable our preparations as well. The time's clearly gone and the space is impaired daily in multiple domains, and we can now be affected through land, sea, air, and we are daily affected through the cyber domain as we live our day-to-day lives. So that's led to a hardening of our defence strategy and a pretty rapid procurement process that has gone with that hardening as well. Where it's seen Army land is we have been directed to become and focus on being a littoral manoeuvre force. Whenever that sort of gets mentioned, people probably instantly think of watercraft, but it is a bit more than that. And my chief, if he was here, would say words to the effect of a littoral force is responsible for the littorals, which extend a couple of 100 kilometres, 120 miles is probably about the conversion there, a couple of 100 kilometres from the land in the waterways, and it is through those domains as well. It's undersea, it's at sea level, it's at land, it's in the air, and it's at space, and that's what Army has been tasked to do. Accordingly, we are undergoing the largest recapitalisation that we have had since World War II. Probably not so ironically, we are going back to a structure that we looked like pretty much in World War II. So a 2022 structure of what a 1943 organisation might have looked like, and investing heavily in watercraft, in long-range fires and combined arms training system to operate in that littoral area. With that is coming a heap of acquisition. Fortunately, some of this was in train before we released our latest National Defence Strategy, and a lot of that is focused on US equipment through the FMS system, and particularly our rotary wing, our armoured vehicles, and some of the other equipments that we are bringing in directly through the FMS case. And I think that's important as we move into talk about MRO and you in particular. I can see the Honourable Loman was sitting in front of me. He's not there at the moment, but I was going to thank him for the statement he made, and just offer a thought that I'm not sure contested logistics is really, I think all logistics where we are contested. And what that tells me is that you either fight your logistics in through water as part of a crisis, or you can take the time before that crisis to actually set your logistics up in places that might offer advantage to you. Whilst Australia's geography is probably under more threat by range than it has been in previous, it still does offer a fantastic geography when we talk about the Indo-Pacific. It straddles both the Indian and Pacific Ocean, which I think is important. And I should have actually brought a slide to demonstrate this, but I'll try and do it with my hand. If you sort of look at Australia and where it is down in the south, and you tilt the northwest up to the north of a two-dimensional map, what you'll see is the bottom of Indonesia about here, and a land bridge that runs all the way through Southeast Asia and up into Central Asia. And that's what we as an Army are sort of focused on. And certainly that's some of the language that we use with AUSA PAC as well. So we do offer somewhere to, I guess, store kit and maintain kit. We do come with a couple of caveats, unfortunately. One is our biodiversity and quarantine sort of rules, which have protected us as a nation very well over time, but are very difficult for militaries in particular to deal with as they do bring kit through Australia, including our own military. And the other thing that we do offer, which can be a bit of a two-edged weapon, is great distances between our north and our south and our east and our west. And where that can become a little tricky is that if you, for those that know the geography of Australia, in the middle of the east coast is Brisbane. Anything sort of north of Brisbane is getting into pretty sparsely sort of populated and infrastructure type sort of territory. So it just makes things up the top a little bit more difficult to deal with. But if you can take into account those two realities, there is definitely an abundance of opportunity that is currently being worked at government to government and military to military level that looks at MRO opportunities for the US Defence Force in Australia. I would argue that it does offer the US some criticality and redundancy. If they were looking to store some equipment down there, it offers a diffusion, and it offers additional resilience and potentially surplus in an AO that is going to become very prominent over the next little bit of time. I think it is worth noting that we are in a number of co-sustainment and co-development sort of programs at the moment, and we can perhaps tease them out a little bit more during questions. But when sort of looking at this case in particular, it was also worthy to note that 60% of our equipment across the ADF is of US origin, and that's both hardware and ammunition as we go forward. We've just purchased that fantastic SEP V3 tank, which has now made its way down to Australia. So again, opportunities down there when we look at that. Looking at the time there, I might just sort of move on. So from our perspective, if we're looking at MRO down in Australia, we're very keen to stipulate from the start we are additive. This is about cooperation and not competition of national industries in the way that we set up some of these programs. We look for compatibility, and we think that compatibility is required. Integration is preferred if we can indeed do it that way, and there are a number of systems where we could look at integration going forward. From an Army system, or from an Army perspective, our whole rotary wing fleet, Chinook, Black Hawk and Apache would sort of play into that sort of realm. We would, of course, look for a minimum viable capability. We're cognizant that at the scale of the US, we are quite small, and putting up some of these industries to support our own military hardware is not really sort of cost viable. So there is a a minimum level of viability, and that generates surplus that is available for others to use as we sort of bring these contracts together. And the last thing that I would add, which is probably a pretty obvious one, and General Hoyle made the point earlier. You lost a third of a year, a tenth of a year getting a watercraft back from Korea to the West Coast if you were indeed going to follow that sort of maintenance line. We offer a significant timing in time and space in the Indo-Pacific area as well. And when you combine that with the commonality of some of the equipment and some of the commitments already made to MRO in watercraft and in radio repairs and that sort of thing, I think things are positive from that perspective, and I might just leave it there.
Make a quick,
Yes, sir.
take 1-2 minutes, and it jogged my memory. I meant to mention this on the front end, but I saw Chris Lohman walk in here, and I meant to say this on co-sustainment because I went to see Chris before he stepped away from his OSD job there about, hey, we did this ROC, it's working great in Poland. We want to support his global sustainment framework at the time, but how does industry help sustain forward in the primary theater there? And it was a good discussion, but it is so different over there. And Heidi brought that up. From Poland, you can provide this co-sustainment, this ability to sustain capability in Romania, Ukraine, and those ABCTs that are forward. But wherever you plop that somewhere in the Indo-Pacific, it's there. And my questions were, there's some unnatural acts that have to happen between, industry and the government to leverage the capability. If an industry partner puts something somewhere, we have to get it to where it needs to be when it needs to be there. So can there be a transportation agreement or something that gets us there? Because in peacetime anyway, it's going to be, it can't be a losing proposition from a money perspective. And so we want to support it, but we have to work through those kind of problems. All right, back to you, Dr. Williams.
Thank you, sir. We have quite a bit of questions for General Hoyle, and I kind of summed some of those up for her. And so, ma'am, how can the Army and its allies better address tyranny of distance, and what strategies will be employed to maintain operational reach and access to key transportation nodes and resources?
All right. Get the easy question first. It's exactly everything that we've been talking about already today. First of all, demand reduction. There's a gentleman who's down at CASCOM who has gone ahead and he's graphed out the size of a brigade combat team over time. And believe it or not, with all the advances and all the technology and all the capabilities that exist in the world, our BCTs have gotten heavier, they've gotten wider, and they require more fuel. We cannot continue to do this, right? It's going to impact strategic transportation. It requires additional fuels, and of course, obviously, fuels of multiple types. It is impacting the fact that we can't use some of our commercial transportation to go ahead and deploy overseas. So I have to order specific types of rail cars to transport our M1s just to get them to the port, right? There's reasons for that. We valued protection, right? Protection was one of the most critical things. It's our sons and daughters that we're trying to protect in those vehicles. But as we've done that, again, we've gotten heavier, wider, and required more fuel. And so demand reduction is one of the most critical things that I can think of. The next thing would be, exactly what General Mohan was talking about earlier with telemaintenance. Telemaintenance, it is a concept. And as he talked about it, he talked about chat rooms. He didn't talk about give me a piece of hardware that has a headset, that has a joystick, that has, right? The requirement is telemaintenance, something that we have been doing for years, right? This is not a new concept, but what is new about it is doing it in contact. It's about doing it forward with allies and partners. It is about a language that is different. And it is about how a mechanic today operates. I think of the last time that I tried to fix or repair something in my house, I went to YouTube and downloaded a video, right? Went to YouTube and downloaded a video. We are visual learners today. The reading piece is being replaced by video. And so, obviously there's some bandwidth there, and that creates a tactical situation where, you can't be on the net for a period of time. And if you are on the net, you're obviously become a target. But telemaintenance, we have to figure that out. How can we pass those packets quickly? How can we pass them in a format that will support either digital resolution or the ability to describe the picture forward? Advanced manufacturing, and I don't want to go into this in a whole lot of depth, but because we do have a panel later on advanced manufacturing. But Army Materiel Command just recently conducted a war game on advanced manufacturing, and I know that panel is just going to be incredible in describing some of the results that came out out of that war game. So I'll leave that one alone. But predictive logistics, as I described a little bit earlier, right? Knowing that hydraulics are going to fail on that vehicle, not because they failed in the past, but because now we know that we've got, a specific movement inside of the vehicle that has been measured, that has been sensed inside the vehicle, and we know that those hydraulic parts are going to fail. And then finally, I would say services. So this is one place the industry can really help, is as we purchase new platforms from industry. Historically, we have done our services on our vehicles with two things in mind: time-based services and usage-based services. In every single wheeled vehicle, we applied the same standards. A vehicle that is a wheeled vehicle created in 2020 certainly is different from a vehicle that was created or built in 1987. Okay, the way that was manufactured, the testing that you have done as you have created that vehicle really demands then that we do services optimized by the testing data, not a baseline standard that the Army has adopted from 1938. And so I believe, and what we have shown over the past year, it was just about a year ago that we did our first batch of 5 platforms for services optimization: the HEMET, the Humvee, PLS, M4s. I can't think of the last one right now, but we did 5 platforms. And we changed the time-based services significantly. And guess what happened? Our OR rates did not reduce at all. Okay, and so over time, over this past year, as we took those initial 5 platforms, we've added 33 more to it, and we've changed those time-based services. And the OR rates, again, are not being impacted. And so that shows that over time, the Army has done time-based services that were not necessary to be conducted, and we have opportunities to take technical data from industry and have you tell us how to maintain them. I think back to being a child in the 1990s. Okay, a little bit of a lie there. But think about when you were driving down the road with your parents and that sticker that went in the window, right? Get your oil serviced in December or at the next 5,000 miles, right? That's what we were doing. We were doing that with every piece of combat equipment in the Army. And so I'm asking industry that as we receive platforms from you, tell us the realities rather than having us adopt the baseline standards. And so with that, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We have a couple of questions where the question is asked about barriers. And Mr. Mason, I'll start with you on this, but certainly any one of you on the panel that want to jump in. What are the barriers when we look at policy, logistical, operational, not only that, congressional, legislative, and any other restrictions that might come to your mind that might prevent or cause the deeper industrial collaboration with allies and partners to be done in a fashion that we would like and speed that we would like for it to be. What would be your position on that and your response?
Oh, I would thank you for the question. And certainly that is a broad and expansive on policies and barriers that we have that exist across, I would say, the interagency, and even when you get into the Department of Commerce and you take a look at some of those aspects as well. And so I would love to get an industry response to that as well. I would just say from a USG or an Army perspective, barriers as we go in. I can talk about the business case, and as General Pasquarette talked about, is how do you close that business case, right? It's not really a policy barrier. For us, it is ultimately the sharing of information with close allies and partners and the amount of time it takes to work through that when there's a clear and compelling need to go do it. And so as we've seen with AUKUS and what we've done in taking the information requirements and being able to boil those down to where we can have much more open exchange. And this is not even in the realm of critical protection, critical technologies. This is simply trying to transfer a TDP for a legacy piece of equipment and get it to a vendor who's in another country. That is an arduous and difficult process that requires us to enter into an interagency routing that can take months and years to get that through. And so the ability to accelerate that really facilitates the conversations and then allows us to move forward in a much more rapid manner when there is actually a really good business case, there's a really good opportunity. But the question is, how do you seize that opportunity within the time and the space that is necessary? Then I'd open it up for others.
I'll follow up on it. You get into requirements, Pat. That was my former life as the G8 a lot. But I guess on this side, when I see when we're subjected to the acquisition process on this side of the fence, when I was subjected to it as the G8, you read a lot about it right now. A lot of it's from Andrew and Palantir and those that have the ear of the administration about how they're going to take another swing at acquisition reform. And my hope is it's not another one of these, a lot of excitement, and then a year or two later, nothing has changed. I think it is a barrier to developing and fielding capability at the speed of relevance. And I see it every day. I'll jump on this prognostic and predictive sustainment capability that not just the Army, everybody wants. We believe, and this is a little self-serving, we believe we've created a fantastic capability that can ingest data and produce forward-looking, decision actionable information for commanders so they can see their fleet. We call it vitals, but it's what is their fleet status today? And I was actually working with John Morgan on this when they were competing on EBSC. And that will allow commander to decide. He can say, okay, we think in this deployment, we're going to put 1,500 miles on the fleet. What is the status 1,500 miles from now? And through stochastic modeling, it can tell you these are the parts that are going to go bad. It's not sensors so much on vehicles, on parts, but wow, we've been beating our heads against the wall to try and figure out how to jumpstart this thing because it runs into the very risk-averse process. And I bet that's just one example that everybody, both inside the Army when I was there and outside. So how we can be a little more, less risky, take some risk and start and jump things, prototype it, test it, and run with it. Right, Michael? All right.
Okay, I think no more takers on that one. General Hoyle, and certainly the rest of the team can jump in, but this one was for you, and I think you might have talked about it already, but it's what are the Army priorities where you feel that industry could assist?
Yeah, I think I kind of covered that in the last question. I'm going to see if Australia maybe has something along those lines about where the assistance can come from.
Yeah, I think at the moment, from an Army perspective, some of the things that we are trying to grapple with, which I don't want to speak for the US Army, but I don't think it is too different to the US Army, is getting iterations of kit to our soldiers at speed of relevance. That's not to suggest that there aren't sort of policy impediments that we need to work through from the inside to clear some of the paths of those going through. But if I was to drill down to a specific example, and one that's probably causing, it's certainly causing us a little bit of angst at the moment, and I have no doubt causing other nations angst, it's the proliferation in the sort of UAS area and trying to get those counter UAS systems quickly and into soldiers' hands, but recognising that each time you bring in one of those systems, they've got a lifespan of 2 to 3 months. You might get 6 months out of them if you're sort of lucky, and then you've got to continually sort of iterate in that space again. Finding the sort of funding for that to balance the policy to actually allow industry to come and help us, I think is a challenge at the moment. And that's one that we are trying to work through. And if we do find a way through, we'll be sure to share that experience as we go on.
I think that's about our time. And definitely want to thank our panel members here. And I believe in closing remarks that there was so many good points that they brought out, but these initiatives, I believe, are critical. And I look at these initiatives in a way as they serve to give our combatant commanders, as I've heard it said, a home field advantage at an away game. And so I think that's a good way to put it. And let's give our panel members a hand, and we're going to close right here.